The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom creaked open, drawing all eyes to the entrance. A hush fell over the room as a young girl, no older than 10, stepped inside. She was small, fragile-looking, with soft blonde hair tied into a messy ponytail. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't just the girl, it was what walked beside her. A bobcat. Its tawny fur was sleek and well-groomed, its muscular body moving with quiet, predatory grace. Golden eyes, sharp and intelligent, flicked across the room, scanning the unfamiliar faces. Its presence sent a ripple of tension through the courtroom. The judge's gavel hadn't even struck yet, but already it was clear. This was no ordinary hearing. The little girl, Emily Carter, clutched the bobcat's harness tightly. Her small fingers barely fit around the thick strap. She walked carefully, her expression a mixture of quiet confidence and nervousness. The bobcat, however, moved without hesitation, its ears twitching slightly at the whispers around them. Judge Nathan Reynolds, a seasoned man in his 60s, adjusted his glasses as he observed the peculiar duo. His years on the bench had exposed him to countless cases, criminals, victims, liars, and innocents, but never before had a wild animal entered his courtroom. "Is this some kind of joke?" a lawyer muttered under his breath, shaking his head. But this was no joke. Emily and her bobcat Willow had come for a reason. The case began. The courtroom was packed, reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, and murmurs spread like wildfire. "Order!" Judge Reynolds finally spoke, his deep voice silencing the room. His gaze shifted to the girl. "Miss Carter, I assume you are here regarding your petition?" Emily swallowed hard and nodded. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "A legal appeal, yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice steady but small. "I'm here to stop them from taking Willow away." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Now people understood. This wasn't just about bringing a bobcat into court. It was about saving it. Across the room, a stern-looking man in a gray suit stood up. Mr. Daniels, a state wildlife official. His expression was unreadable, but his posture was rigid and authoritative. "Your Honor," Daniels began, "this is a wild animal. A bobcat does not belong in a child's care. It is neither safe for her nor for the public. The state requires immediate relocation of the animal to a proper sanctuary." Emily flinched but held her ground. Willow, sensing her distress, let out a low, almost protective growl. The sound was enough to make a few people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Judge Reynolds raised a brow, intrigued. This wasn't a simple case of ownership. This was a battle between law and something deeper, something human. He leaned forward. "Miss Carter, can you explain why you believe this bobcat belongs with you?" Emily took a deep breath. She knew this was her moment. If she failed, Willow would be taken away, locked behind metal bars, away from the only family she had ever known. So she told her story. A bond born from tragedy. It started 2 years ago. "My dad was a wildlife rescuer," Emily began. "He worked in the mountains, helping injured animals. One night, there was a storm, a really bad one. Trees were falling, lightning struck everywhere, and then there was a fire." The courtroom fell silent. Every eye locked onto the little girl as she spoke. Emily's fingers curled around Willow's fur, drawing comfort from her presence. "My dad didn't come home." A heavy pause. Even Judge Reynolds looked taken aback. "They found his truck at the edge of the forest. He had tried to save some animals caught in the fire. They said he didn't make it." A few quiet gasps echoed through the room. Reporters stopped writing, their pens hovering above their notepads. Emily blinked rapidly, willing herself not to cry. When the firefighters cleared the area, they found Willow. She was just a baby, burned, scared, and alone. My dad had tried to save her. She was the last thing he ever tried to protect. Willow, as if sensing the weight of Emily's words, nuzzled against her leg, a soft purring sound breaking the silence. Emily looked up at the judge, her eyes shining with quiet determination. "He saved her life, and when he couldn't come home, I made sure she did." The entire courtroom was still. Even Mr. Daniels, the state official, looked momentarily thrown off. Judge Reynolds exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. This was no longer just a legal matter. This was personal. The Bobcat's unusual reaction, the long silence, it was clear. This was something extraordinary. Finally, the judge spoke again, his voice carefully measured. Miss Carter, I understand your attachment, but wild animals are unpredictable. How can you be sure Willow is safe? Emily didn't hesitate. Instead of answering with words, she did something unexpected. She signaled Willow. It was subtle, just a tiny movement of her fingers, but the bobcat responded instantly. In front of a room full of people, the wild animal sat down obediently, its tail curling around its paws. Its golden eyes remained locked on Emily, waiting for her next command. The entire courtroom was in shock. Judge Reynolds leaned forward, fascinated. You've trained her? Emily nodded. She understands me, and I understand her. Judge Reynolds studied them both for a long moment. Then, just as he was about to speak, something unexpected happened. Willow's ears twitched, and in a flash, the bobcat whipped its head toward the courtroom doors. Before anyone heard the sound of footsteps outside, the door slammed open. A man in uniform rushed inside, his breathing heavy. Judge Reynolds, sir, there's a situation, he panted. He stopped, his eyes widening when he saw the bobcat sitting calmly at Emily's side. But Emily wasn't looking at the officer. She was staring at Willow, because the bobcat had sensed something before anyone else did, and whatever it wasn't good. The moment the officer burst into the courtroom, the entire room stiffened. Every eye turned toward him, but Emily's focus remained fixed on Willow. The bobcat was rigid, its ears pinned back, muscles tense like a coiled spring. Something was wrong. Judge Reynolds composed himself despite the sudden interruption and cleared his throat. Officer, what is the meaning of this? The man hesitated, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. Sir, there's been an incident outside. We need to clear the courtroom immediately. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Reporters exchanged glances, their hands tightening around their pens. Fear flickered in their eyes as the tension in the air grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Emily's grip on Willow's harness tightened. The bobcat had sensed danger before anyone else had. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Whatever was happening outside, Willow knew more than anyone else in the room. Judge Reynolds studied the officer carefully before responding. What kind of incident? His voice was firm, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. The officer hesitated again, his gaze flickering toward the doorway, as though expecting something or someone to come through at any moment. Emily's stomach clenched. Her instincts screamed that this wasn't just a normal courtroom disturbance. Then, before the officer could answer, a loud crash echoed from outside. It sounded like metal slamming against metal. People gasped. A few stood up, ready to flee. Even the judge's normally composed expression faltered. Emily's pulse quickened. What was happening? She turned to Willow. The bobcat was staring intently at the entrance, its body stiff, its tail flicking anxiously. Emily had seen this reaction before. It was the same way Willow had behaved when they had encountered a predator in the wild, and that realization sent a chill down her spine. This wasn't just some random disturbance. There was something out there. Willow's warning. Judge Reynolds slammed his gavel again, restoring some semblance of order as people murmured in alarm. Officer, explain what's going on. Now. The officer took a deep breath, then spoke, his voice tense. Sir, we received reports of a wild animal on the premises. Silence. Then all at once, chaos. What do you mean a wild animal? One lawyer demanded, his voice rising. You're saying there's another one out there? It's not Willow, is it? Someone else whispered, eyes darting nervously toward Emily's bobcat. Emily's stomach clenched. Another animal? Here. The officer shook his head, his jaw tight. No, it's not a bobcat, but it is large, and it's loose. The room tensed further. Judge Reynolds narrowed his eyes. What kind of animal are we dealing with? The officer hesitated again. His hesitation said everything. Emily exhaled shakily. She turned to Willow, pressing a hand against the bobcat's side. Willow was breathing fast, her eyes still locked on the doorway. It was as if she knew what was out there. And then the officer spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. It's a mountain lion. The courtroom erupted in noise. People gasped, some scrambling to grab their belongings. Lawyers and reporters whispered frantically, fear flickering in their eyes. The tension in the room escalated, thickening the air until it felt impossible to breathe. "A mountain lion?" one lawyer demanded. "You're saying there's a mountain lion on the loose? How did it get in here?" Emily's heart sank. She couldn't believe it. A mountain lion. That was unheard of. These creatures rarely ventured into human spaces, and when they did, it was usually out of desperation, hunger, injury, or something worse. She looked down at Willow. The bobcat was still focused, muscles tense. It wasn't just reacting to the news, it was listening. Emily's breath hitched. Willow could hear the mountain lion. The tension in the room reached its breaking point as the officer's radio crackled to life. "Confirmed visual. The lion is in the underground parking lot. It's cornered but agitated. We need animal control immediately." Emily clenched her fists. She couldn't just stand by and wait. She knew how these situations usually ended. Authorities would try to sedate the animal, but if it resisted or if they deemed it too dangerous, they would put it down. She couldn't let that happen. She made a decision. "Your Honor," Emily spoke suddenly, her voice loud and clear. Judge Reynolds turned toward her, his eyebrows raised. "Yes, Miss Carter." "I need to go down there," Emily said, her gaze fixed firmly on the judge. The room went silent. All eyes were on her. Mr. Daniels, the state wildlife official, scoffed. "Absolutely not. This is exactly why wild animals don't belong in a courtroom, or with a child." Emily ignored him, her eyes locked onto the judge. "Please, I have experience with animals. I know how to approach them. I know what to do." Judge Reynolds studied her carefully. "Miss Carter, that's an incredibly dangerous situation." "I know," she said, her voice steady, "but if we don't handle it the right way, that mountain lion is going to die." Silence. Even Daniels hesitated at that. Emily took a step forward. "You've seen how Willow reacts to me. She trusts me, and I know that mountain lions are different, but I also know they don't attack unless they feel threatened. I just need a chance to help." For a long moment, Judge Reynolds said nothing. He just studied the young girl standing so firmly before him. Finally, he let out a slow breath. "How would you do it?" he asked carefully. Emily's heart leaped. "I need to see it first. I need to understand if it's scared, injured, or just lost. If I can figure out what's wrong, I can help calm it down." The judge tapped his fingers on the desk. He wasn't the kind of man to take reckless risks, but he had also seen something extraordinary today. A bond between a girl and a wild animal, unlike anything he had ever witnessed. He turned to the officer. "Is the parking lot secure?" The officer nodded. "It's empty. Everyone has been cleared out." Judge Reynolds sighed. Then finally he gave a single nod. "All right." Emily exhaled in relief, but before she could take a step forward, the judge raised a hand. "Under one condition," he said. Emily tensed. "What is it?" "You don't go alone," he said. "Willow goes with you." Emily blinked in surprise. Then after a moment she nodded. She wouldn't have it any other way. And with that, she turned toward the exit, Willow by her side. The entire courtroom watched in stunned silence as the two of them stepped toward the unknown. The courtroom was still buzzing with whispers as Emily and Willow stepped toward the exit. The atmosphere outside was thick with tension. The officers, scattered around the building's perimeter, were on edge, their radios crackling with urgent chatter. Reporters and courtroom spectators had followed, their curiosity palpable, their eyes tracking every move Emily made. But none of that mattered to her. Her focus was on the underground parking lot, the place where the mountain lion was waiting. As Emily and Willow approached the parking lot, a tall officer stepped forward, gripping his radio with both hands. "Miss Carter," he called, his voice wavering slightly. "Are you sure about this?" Emily lifted her chin, her determination clear in her eyes. "Yes." She glanced down at Willow, who was standing still beside her, her ears pricked forward. The bobcat wasn't scared, just alert. She was already listening for the mountain lion, already preparing for what was to come. One of the officers hesitated. "We've got animal control on the way. They'll handle it." Emily clenched her fists. She knew how animal control operated. They would try to sedate the mountain lion, But if it resisted or if they deemed it too dangerous, they would put it down. She couldn't let that happen. Not after everything that had happened today. If they handle it the way they usually do, she said, her voice low, that animal won't leave here alive. The lead officer paused, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. All right, he said after a long silence, but you listen to my commands. The second this gets dangerous, we're pulling you out. Emily nodded, her heart pounding. She could feel the weight of the officer's gaze, but she didn't falter. Willow padded beside her, silent as a shadow. The Bobcat was ready. The parking garage ahead of them was eerily quiet. The sounds of the city faded behind them, replaced by the soft hum of flickering overhead lights. The air was thick with the scent of oil and damp concrete, and something else, something wild. Willow's paws moved silently, her body in perfect harmony with the shadows. Emily stopped in her tracks, instinctively following Willow's lead. The Bobcat's ears twitched as she listened. Emily did the same, holding her breath. The scrape of claws against pavement, a low, rumbling breath. Her stomach tightened. The mountain lion was close. She took a careful step forward, scanning the dimly lit space. The police had cleared the area, but the tension still lingered, like an unseen force hanging in the air. And then, just ahead of them, there was movement. Slight but unmistakable. A shape, half hidden behind a row of concrete pillars. Emily's breath caught in her throat. There it was, the mountain lion. It was massive, its golden fur rippling under the dim lights. Its muscles were coiled tight, ready to spring. Its ears were pinned back, and its eyes, glowing with fear and uncertainty, were locked on Emily and Willow. The mountain lion was watching them, waiting for them to make a move. Emily forced herself to stay calm. Fear wouldn't help here. She had to be steady. She knelt beside Willow, her voice soft as she spoke. Do you see him, girl? Willow didn't move, but Emily could feel the shift in her posture. A subtle change, but it was there. The Bobcat was aware of the situation, aware of the mountain lion's presence. Willow let out a soft chuffing sound, a low, reassuring sound. It was a signal, a message. The mountain lion's ears twitched. Emily exhaled slowly, keeping her voice steady. Good. He's listening. She removed her backpack and unzipped it, pulling out a bundle of dried meat. It wasn't much, but it was something. Something to offer, something to calm the mountain lion down. She held it out, making sure her movements were slow and deliberate. I know you're scared, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. You're not supposed to be here, are you? The mountain lion didn't move, but its eyes flicked to the food in her hands. Emily took another careful step forward, staying low, making herself as non-threatening as possible. The mountain lion let out a low warning growl. Emily froze, holding her breath. Willow, still at her side, responded with a soft trill, a quiet reassurance. Not a threat, just a message. The same message she had sent to the mountain lion in the wild. Trust me. Emily could feel the tension in the air as the mountain lion's muscles twitched, ready to bolt at any moment. She continued to move slowly, not daring to make any sudden movements. Her heart raced in her chest. Then Emily saw it, a deep gash along the lion's front leg, the blood still fresh. She inhaled sharply. That was why it was acting this way. It was injured. Her voice remained soft, her eyes locked on the mountain lion's. You're hurt, aren't you? The lion snorted, a sharp huffing sound, its muscles tensed, ready to flee. Emily didn't stop. She set the food down gently, moving back to give the lion space. I'm not here to hurt you, she whispered. I just want to help. For what felt like an eternity, the mountain lion didn't move. Then slowly, cautiously, it sniffed the air. Its golden eyes flicked to her hands as she held out the food. Emily took another step back, giving the lion space. The mountain lion's muscles twitched again, but this time, it didn't flee. Instead, it took a step forward, then another, and another. Emily held her breath. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She could hear the officers behind her, their radios crackling with anxious chatter. But she didn't flinch. She didn't look away from the lion. She had to keep her focus. Finally, the mountain lion lowered its head, sniffing the food again, its eyes watching Emily intently. Slowly, it took another step forward. And then, with a deep, shuddering breath, the lion brushed its massive head against Willow's side. The entire parking garage went silent. Willow let out a soft purr, nudging the lion in return. Emily's chest tightened. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something deeper. The lion had accepted them. It had accepted their help. A long silence followed, and then, from behind her, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Judge Reynolds had arrived. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant, as he took in the scene before him. "You really believe you can help it?" Emily met his gaze, her voice steady as she answered, "Yes." Dr. Holloway stepped closer, still silent, as the mountain lion began to show signs of trust. The journey to save this creature was far from over. But for the first time in what seemed like forever, Emily believed they had a chance. The moment the mountain lion touched Willow, the atmosphere in the parking garage shifted. There was an air of trust between the three of them now, a silent agreement. Emily could feel it. She had seen it in the way Willow had interacted with the lion, and now she could see it in the lion's eyes as it slowly started to relax. It wasn't just fear in those golden eyes anymore. There was something else, something far deeper. The officers, once tense and ready to spring into action, remained still, watching the scene unfold in stunned silence. Even Judge Reynolds had stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the mountain lion, then shifting to Emily as if waiting for her next move. Emily's heart was racing, but she didn't let it show. She kept her movements slow and deliberate. She knew that the mountain lion's trust was fragile. One wrong move and everything could fall apart. But she also knew that they were running out of time. Animal control would be there soon, and if they didn't act quickly, the lion might never get the chance to heal. The officers had been standing back, waiting for the scene to develop, but now Emily could feel their hesitation. One by one, their radios crackled with anxious commands, but none of them moved forward. They were waiting for her to take charge. She reached into her bag, carefully pulling out a small first aid kit. The lion was still breathing fast, its muscles tight, but it wasn't as tense as before. Emily moved closer, every inch of her body screaming for caution. Willow was by her side, her body still, but her eyes locked onto the lion. She knew her role in this moment. She was the bridge. She was the one who had calmed the lion down enough to make this next step possible. "Easy," Emily whispered, her voice low and steady. "I'm here to help." The mountain lion's ears twitched. It wasn't growling anymore. Instead, it seemed to be listening to the tone of Emily's voice, to the subtle way Willow remained calm at her side. Slowly, Emily crouched down, her knees gently touching the concrete floor. The lion watched her every movement, its head slightly lowered. She unzipped the first aid kit, making sure not to make any sudden movements. She knew that, though the lion had shown trust, it could still react unpredictably. She pulled out a clean cloth, dipped it into antiseptic, and then slowly, carefully, began to move closer to the lion's injured leg. The lion stiffened but didn't move away. It was still unsure, still cautious, but the fact that it didn't bolt was a good sign. Willow, sensing the moment, gave a soft, reassuring chuff. The cloth met the lion's injured leg, and it flinched slightly. Emily paused, holding her breath. But the lion didn't pull away. She gently pressed the cloth against the wound, cleaning the blood away. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to stay steady. This was the moment that could make or break everything. The lion let out a low huff, and Emily whispered, "I know it stings, but it'll help. I promise." Willow's presence was like an anchor. Her calmness was palpable, and it made Emily feel stronger. She pressed the cloth against the wound again, more confidently this time, and the lion didn't resist. The officers behind her watched in stunned silence. Some of them had seen animal rescues before, but nothing like this. Emily wasn't just treating an injured animal. She was building a bond with it, a bond that was crucial for its survival. After a few moments, Emily looked up, meeting Judge Reynolds' gaze. His expression was unreadable, but she saw something in his eyes, something that wasn't there before. It was respect. And maybe, just maybe, a glimmer of awe. "Are you sure this is safe?" one of the officers asked, his voice hesitant. Emily didn't look away from the lion. "He's not dangerous. Not if he trusts me. He's only reacting to pain and fear." The officer didn't argue. He had seen enough in the last few minutes to understand that Emily knew what she was doing. Even Mr. Daniels, who had initially been so firm in his stance, remained silent. His eyes narrowed as he watched the scene unfold. Emily carefully wrapped the bandage around the lion's injured leg, securing it tightly. It wasn't perfect, but it would do for now. As she finished, she sat back on her heels and took a deep breath. The worst of it was over, but there was still a long road ahead. The lion's leg would heal with time, but the emotional damage, his fear, his trauma, was something that would take longer to heal. "Your Honor," Emily spoke, her voice steady but tired, "he needs to be taken to a sanctuary, a real one, somewhere where he can heal. I can't keep him here. He belongs in the wild, but we need to make sure he has a chance first." Judge Reynolds looked down at her, his eyes softening. He studied the mountain lion for a moment, and then, without looking away from Emily, he spoke. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "I've seen many things in my years on the bench, but I've never seen anything quite like this." He paused, then continued, "I will grant your petition. The mountain lion will be sent to a sanctuary under your care, but I expect you to take full responsibility for his rehabilitation. If he's going to heal, it has to be done right." Emily nodded, relief washing over her. "Thank you, Your Honor." But there was still the issue of the sanctuary. She needed to get the lion to a place where he would be treated, where he could live and eventually be released into the wild. She couldn't let him stay in a cage forever. "I know a place," she said softly, "a sanctuary that specializes in rehabilitating injured animals. They can help him heal properly and release him safely." Judge Reynolds glanced at the officers around him. "Get in touch with them immediately. Make sure everything is arranged." The officers nodded, their movements quick as they began to coordinate. Dr. Holloway, who had been watching from the sidelines, stepped forward. He had been quiet throughout the entire ordeal, but now he spoke. "You've done something extraordinary today, Miss Carter," he said, his voice filled with respect. Emily gave him a small smile. "I didn't do it alone," she replied, glancing down at Willow. The bobcat was sitting by her side, her tail flicking gently, as if she too understood the weight of the moment. The mountain lion, still recovering from the shock, slowly lifted his head. His eyes met Emily's once more. It wasn't the same fear-filled gaze from before. There was something softer in those golden eyes now, a flicker of trust. He wasn't ready to return to the wild yet, but Emily knew that in time he would be, and she would be there to help him every step of the way. As the officers made preparations to transport the mountain lion, Emily looked down at Willow. "You did good, girl," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude. Willow let out a soft purr, nuzzling against Emily's leg as if to say, "We did good." And in that moment, Emily realized that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. A journey not just for the mountain lion, but for her and Willow as well. Together, they had bridged the gap between the wild and the human world, and the lessons they had learned today would stay with them forever. But there was still one more thing to do. The mountain lion had a chance at life again, but he wasn't the only one who needed healing. Emily knew that her own heart had been forever changed by this journey, and with that thought, she took a step forward, ready to see the mountain lions safely to the sanctuary and begin the next chapter of their shared story. The ride to the sanctuary was long, but Emily didn't feel tired. The van hummed gently as it rolled down the winding roads, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. Willow was curled up in Emily's lap, purring softly as the soft sound of the engine lulling them into a quiet, contemplative silence. In the back of the van, the mountain lion lay on a thick blanket, his eyes still a little distant, but the restlessness from earlier was gone. His breathing was steady now, his muscles no longer tense. He wasn't healed yet, but he was calm, and that was something Emily could hold on to. She glanced down at Willow, the bobcat's soft purr like a balm to her own weary soul. The bond they shared had deepened in ways she couldn't have imagined. not just with Willow, but with the mountain lion too. Their connection wasn't about ownership or control, it was about trust. Willow had shown the mountain lion that it wasn't the world they should fear, it was the pain and the unknown. Emily had always known there was something special about Willow, something more than just a companion. But today she'd witnessed something extraordinary. Willow wasn't just her friend. She was a bridge between two worlds, the wild and the human, and she had helped save a life. The mountain lion stirred slightly, his head lifting, and Emily noticed that his golden eyes were studying her. There was no longer fear in them, only curiosity. Perhaps a small part of him wondered who she really was. He was starting to see her as more than a stranger. He was beginning to trust her. Emily gently stroked Willow's fur, thinking of the long journey ahead. The sanctuary was still hours away, but she wasn't worried. It would be worth it for both the mountain lion and for herself. She had to believe that the work she was doing was right, that this was her purpose. There were so many animals out there in need of help, just like the mountain lion had been. And she wouldn't stop until she had given them all a second chance, just like she had with him. The headlights from the van cut through the evening fog, illuminating the narrow road ahead. Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her, but also a deep sense of responsibility. What they had done wasn't over. The mountain lion still had a long road to recovery ahead, and Emily still had her own healing to do. The thought of her father crossed her mind. She hadn't spoken about him to anyone since the hearing, but today had brought back so many memories. Her father had been a wildlife rescuer, just like her. His dedication, his passion for animals, had shaped the way she viewed the world. She had followed in his footsteps without even realizing it. She had inherited his heart for rescue, for compassion, for the belief that every creature, no matter how wild or seemingly untamable, deserved a second chance. But her father was gone now. He had given his life to save others, and now it was her turn to carry on that legacy. She glanced down at Willow once more. The bobcat was nuzzling into her lap, content and peaceful. The bond between them was solid, unshakable, and she could feel her father's presence in that, in the way she and Willow worked together, in the way she had saved a life, just as her father had done for so many animals in the past. As the van rolled down the road, a sudden thought hit her. It was strange, almost surreal, to think that she had been the one to make a difference today, that she had been the one to bridge the gap between the wild and the human world. But in doing so, she had also changed her own world in ways she hadn't expected. The sanctuary wasn't just a place for the mountain lion to heal, it was a place for Emily to heal too. Hours later, the van finally turned off the main road and onto a winding path that led deeper into the forest. The air was thick with the scent of pine, and the soft chirping of crickets filled the night. The sanctuary was located in a remote area, far from the noise and distractions of the city. It was a place where animals could find peace, a place where they could recover in solitude before being reintroduced to the wild. As the van approached the large gates of the sanctuary, Emily felt a sense of finality wash over her. This was the end of the journey for the mountain lion, and yet it was only the beginning. The van came to a stop, and the sanctuary staff, led by Dr. James Holloway, were waiting at the entrance. Emily climbed out of the van, Willow still in her arms, and walked over to meet him. The mountain lion, still drowsy from the pain medication, was gently lifted from the back of the van by two of the sanctuary workers. They moved with quiet care, mindful of his injury. Dr. Holloway approached Emily, his expression softening as he looked down at the mountain lion. "You did good," he said, his voice filled with quiet admiration. Emily smiled faintly. "We did good," she corrected, glancing down at Willow, who was now perched on Emily's shoulder, watching the scene with a calm intensity. The bobcat's presence made everything feel right. Willow had been the key to this moment, and Emily knew she owed her just as much as she owed the mountain lion. Dr. Holloway nodded, glancing at the lion with a thoughtful expression. "You've made a real difference, Miss Carter. The bond you've created between these animals and yourself. It's remarkable." Emily's eyes softened. "I didn't do it alone," she said again, her gaze meeting the mountain lion's. The lion's golden eyes were no longer filled with fear. They were calm now, steady. He had come a long way, and so had she. the team took the mountain lion into the sanctuary's rehabilitation center, where he would be treated for his injury and given time to recover. The healing process would take time, but Emily felt a deep sense of peace knowing he was in the right hands. The sanctuary was where he belonged. It was his new chance at life. Dr. Holloway turned to Emily, his expression serious now. "I'll keep you updated on his progress," he said, "but I think we both know he has a strong chance of recovery. You've given him that." Emily nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." As Dr. Holloway walked away to give his team instructions, Emily lingered for a moment, her thoughts drifting to the mountain lion. She had kept her promise. She had done everything she could to help him, and now he would have the chance to return to the wild. But as she stood there looking at the moonlit landscape of the sanctuary, she knew her work wasn't done. There were still so many more animals out there, waiting for their chance, and she would be there, ready to help them, just like she had helped Willow and the mountain lion. Turning to leave, Emily felt Willow nudge her gently. The bobcat's warm fur brushed against her cheek, a silent reminder that no matter how difficult the journey was, they would always face it together. And for the first time in a long while, Emily felt certain of one thing. The wild had a place in her heart, just as she had a place in the wild. Together they would continue the journey, one life at a time. As the days passed, Emily remained at the sanctuary, closely involved in the mountain lion's recovery. It wasn't an easy road. His wound took longer to heal than expected, and the emotional scars from his encounter with fear and pain lingered. But every day Emily was there, offering quiet reassurance, keeping him calm with her voice, and allowing him to heal at his own pace. Willow, ever the steadfast companion, remained by her side, helping the lion feel less alone in a world full of unfamiliar faces and places. The sanctuary staff watched with amazement as the bond between Emily, Willow, and the mountain lion deepened. It was rare to see such an unspoken understanding between a girl, a bobcat, and a wild animal that had once been so unpredictable. But that was the magic of trust, the kind that grew between them despite the odds. Willow had been the key, the silent translator of the wild, and Emily had been the patient hand that guided them all forward. One morning a few weeks later, the mountain lion was finally ready for release. His wound had healed, and his body was strong again. The sanctuary team had carefully monitored his progress, and the time had come. Emily, as promised, was there by his side, with Willow perched on her shoulder. Dr. Holloway met her at the gates of the sanctuary. He looked down at the mountain lion, now standing tall, his golden eyes filled with a calm confidence. "He's ready, Doctor," Holloway said, his voice full of quiet respect. "Thanks to you, he's going back where he belongs." Emily nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. It wasn't easy. Letting go of something she had fought so hard to protect, to help, felt like the hardest part of the journey. But she knew it was the right thing to do. This was his life, his future, and she had to trust that he would find his way back to the wild. The team opened the gates, and the mountain lion stepped forward, pausing for a moment as if to take in the vast world outside. Then, with one powerful stride, he moved into the wilderness, disappearing into the trees. A silence lingered in the air, broken only by the distant sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. Emily stood there watching him go, feeling a mixture of pride and sadness. She had helped him, but in the end, it was his choice to step into the unknown. And in doing so, he had reclaimed his place in the wild. Willow let out a soft purr, nudging Emily gently. The bobcat's presence was a comforting reminder that some bonds could never be broken. They had been through something extraordinary together, and now their journey was only beginning. As they turned back to the sanctuary, Emily realized that what she had learned from this experience was something much deeper than saving an animal. It was about trust, understanding, and the importance of seeing the wild, not as something to be controlled or feared, but as something to be respected. And more than that, it was about the power of connection, the way two seemingly different worlds, the human and the wild, could come together in a shared moment of healing and growth. Lessons from the story: trust is built over time. The bond between Emily, Willow, and the mountain lion didn't happen overnight. It was built through patience, understanding, and care. Trust isn't something that can be forced. It's something that develops gradually, especially when there is mutual respect and a willingness to learn from one another. Compassion can bridge divides. The story highlights how compassion can bridge even the widest divides between species, between humans and animals, and even within ourselves. Emily's compassion for the mountain lion, fueled by her father's legacy, allowed her to see beyond fear and instinct, creating an unexpected connection with the wild. Healing requires patience and time. Healing, both physical and emotional, doesn't happen quickly. The mountain lion's recovery wasn't just about fixing his injury. It was about allowing him to trust again, to feel safe in a world that had once threatened him. This is a reminder that true healing requires patience, understanding, and time. Letting go is part of the process. Emily's final act, letting the mountain lion go, was one of the hardest decisions she had to make. Sometimes the greatest act of love is to let go and allow the other to find their path. It's about recognizing when it's time to give them the freedom they deserve, even if it hurts. The wild is not to be tamed, but respected. The mountain lion's journey back to the wild represents the delicate balance between humans and nature. We are not meant to dominate or control the wild, but to respect it. It's about coexisting and understanding that each creature has a place in this world. The wild is not ours to own, but ours to protect. Family isn't always defined by blood. Emily's bond with Willow and the mountain lion proves that family isn't always about blood relations. Family is about connection, trust, and the willingness to support each other, no matter how different you may seem. Ultimately, this story teaches us that the greatest changes in life often come from unexpected places and connections. Whether it's a wild animal or a person, sometimes the most profound lessons come from the simplest acts of kindness and the courage to embrace the unknown.